Reporting live from the Hodlonaut Craig Wright trial here in Oslo.
Craig Stephen Wright, born son of son, is an Australian computer scientist and businessman. He is publicly claimed to be the main part of the team that created Bitcoin and the entity behind the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. These claims are regarded as false by most of the media and the cryptocurrency community.
The purpose of this trial is to assess to the degree that Hodlonaut's tweets were damaging, not to ultimately rule whether or not Craig Wright is Satoshi, but to do that fairly requires the judge to come to an understanding of whether or not Craig Wright is Satoshi.
This Australian says he and his dead friend invented Bitcoin.
There was about an hour of discussion about trusts and keys. And to be honest, there was a mixture of clear and confusing information. While understanding that this is a very complex subject, it's hard to say if the lawyer was maybe a little confused or just in the explanation, it was a little hard to follow. But also, I was getting everything translated from Norwegian, so it's hard to know what was lost in translation as well. There was also a deep discussion about the Panama Trust and the timeline, and there was a very exhaustive delineation using previous rulings, both the McCormick ruling, the Florida ruling. There were numerous previous cases in Australia as well that were all factored into and kind of just recapped and reported on by one of Hodlonaut's lawyers. And then the day actually ended with one of Hodlonaut's lawyers citing over 7,000 tweets that cite fraud or fake Toshi, and she read a large smattering of them, many of them very explicit, and also documented a good deal of the replies with Craig Wright's since deleted Twitter, but within threads having some of the replies preserved.
Thou who tells people to hodl is a scammer pushing a Ponzi. Basically pump, leave like light Charlie. The sale is to make a few as the bag holders collapse. Bad lop. Occam's razor, the real Satoshi, should be the most effortless in proving whatever he wants to prove, instead of CSW's countless desperate attempts. Og så svarer da Wright, foo, the burn, lol, no, proof is as I pattern, as I make you all poor losers begging, that is the proof.
The lawyers were more showing all of the times that there had been promises of signing or moving Bitcoin to a specific address, to a specific person, and it not being done and delivered. I do think there was a good overview of the history of Bitcoin, talking about the white paper and the dates even included in the white paper. It was a long day, and I know tomorrow there will be more voices. I'm not sure if all of Craig's 9 lawyers will be presenting, but I'm sure it will be some assortment. Both of Hodlonaut's lawyers spoke at certain times today, but we have a lot to cover. I know that this is only day 1. There will be a much deeper dive, and there will be witnesses. The judge did mention today that she has requested the large number of witnesses to be whittled down. I believe it's currently standing at 5, and she's asking for it to be 3. But we will continue to be filming this entire trial and also reporting live from Oslo. Today was the second day of the Hodlonaut versus Craig Wright case here in Oslo, Norway. After yesterday's proceedings where Hodlonaut's lawyers were laying out their case, today was the day for Craig Wright's lawyers to lay out his case. It was the same lawyer the whole time. His name is Monsaus. He started with a long opening about freedom of speech. He talked about what that means in the UK, what that means in Norway. After talking about freedom of speech, then there was a lot of history. There was a lot of backstory, and there was a lot of context, basically proving different instances through narrative of how Craig Wright had already proven that he was Satoshi.
Organized Bitcoin pleb attack on shitcoin scammers. Who is in for some toxicity?
He talked a lot about prominent people on Twitter that, whether through the Lightning Torch trust chain, they knew of Hodlonaut or started following him, and he tallied up the numbers and the impressions to really drive home the point that Hodlonaut was a very influential person. The arguments today were saying followed by Jack Dorsey with all of these followers, so then also has that wider reach. After speaking a great deal about the impact and reach that Hodlonaut has on Twitter. He then went into detail on a Telegram group, a Pleb Bitcoin Telegram group, and then also reading a lot of tweets from various toxic maxi groups.
Craig Wright is a very sad and pathetic scammer, clearly mentally ill. Everything about him induces deep cringe. I suffer from obviousness fatigue after still having to read posts arguing why he isn't Satoshi.
And he was really trying to set a stage for this rabid, toxic environment. He said those words so many times. He was really trying to set the stage that this was a very hostile, bullying environment. He talked a lot about the BTC versus BSV, the Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Satoshi vision groups, and how they're really at odds with the Bitcoin crowd trying to deplatform BSV crowd.
It takes a lot for me to block people, but having BSV or XRP in your Twitter handle is just too much.
He went into great detail on numerous accounts into history of Craig Wright's life.
Hvordan var Craig Wright? He likes to get PhDs, he likes to do research, he likes to write papers.
Different interests that he had. He studied Japanese culture. He was into coding from a very young age. Also went into detail about his relationship with his uncle and his grandfather, and at one point cited that his uncle had received an early draft of the white paper and could corroborate that he had, in fact, written the white paper originally. He also cited a lot of private emails.
When is the first time you had contact with Satoshi Nakamoto? I think it was fairly early, in May of 2010. And I contacted him via the Bitcoin Talk forums.
Monsas was crafting a very lengthy narrative why he could be and how it all kind of made sense that he is Satoshi. He told a lot of stories and he tied it to a lot of familial and personal intimate relationships and really used their vouching for Craig Wright as proof. There was a name that came up a lot today, which was Andreessen. There was more or less a saga about signing with keys that went back and forth. Numerous instances of him proving beyond a shadow of a doubt to this one individual that he was Satoshi Nakamoto. So the witness of Andreessen, it would make a lot of sense. I don't know if he will be on the witness stand, but it would make a lot of sense if he was called as a witness. But they're using all of his vouching as a witness before. He has been a witness in previous cases. I'm not sure if he'll be joining us tomorrow. So tomorrow we will be doing 2 cross-examinations. The first part of the day will be Hodlonaut's cross-examination. The second part will be Craig Wright's cross-examination. We still had technical difficulties today, but we are hoping that by tomorrow we will be able to play the video clips that have now been cited by both sides of this court case. That's it for now. We'll be back tomorrow with a recap of our cross-examination day. Have a good night. Today was the 3rd day of the Hodlonaut versus Craig Wright trial. The first half of the day, Hodlonaut was on the stand. First, questions were posed by Hodlonaut's lawyers, and then by Craig Wright's lawyers, and then the judge had the opportunity to ask any other questions. The second half was Craig Wright on the stand. Hodlonaut's lawyer started out asking general life backstory, talked about when Hodlonaut got into Bitcoin, when he started Twitter, and really after going through that chronology, then talked about the chronology specifically of this case. After we went through the timeline, we went through a lot of fake Toshi tweets, and we also cited the Craig Wright is a fraud hashtag, and we are all Hodlonaut hashtag. When Craig Wright's lawyer started asking questions of Hodlonaut, he was focusing a lot on the emotion and the purpose behind. He asked multiple times if this is how Hodlonaut usually speaks. After Craig Wright's lawyer was done, the judge pointed out that it seems as though there's been a lot of defamation towards Hodlonaut as well. She asked, how is this any different? Craig Wright took the stand, and his lawyer asked a lot of questions about the history. It felt a little repetitive of a lot of what we covered yesterday. Hodlonaut's lawyer began by highlighting Craig Wright's Wikipedia page and asking about his conviction status. After this, there was a very messy conversation about keys.
What would it take for you to then access the private keys?
The whole point is you don't need the private keys. That's what I'm trying to tell people.
Slice keys, private keys. There was a lot of back and forth about how, if he could, decrypt.
Once you have proven your identity, then you register the key. You don't do it the other way around. You can't come in later and go, I promise this was my key.
And then Craig Wright kind of went on a rant about Bitcoin not being encrypted.
I want to make sure that judges and courts understand that Bitcoin is not encrypted and it can be seized, frozen, and accessed under a court order.
So the judge's closing question was very interesting.
Just help me understand why proving in that way. I understand what you're saying, that writing with a signature is not proving identity. I understand your point. Why is that harder for you to do than whatever it is you're going through here and in other court cases?
It's not emotionally difficult. I mean, it was, but it's harder to do.
We'll start with all the witnesses tomorrow, but for now, good night. Today is the fourth day of the Hodlonaut v. Craig Wright case. Today is the first day of witness testimonies. I'm standing here in the courtroom where all of the proceedings have been taking place. We have Craig Wright's legal team on this side. We have Hodlonaut's legal team on this side, and the judge presiding up here. The first witness was Jensen. We talked a lot about the Twitter account. We talked about the tone of the tweets. We talked about the language that was used, whether it was defamatory. The second witness was Halseth. We went deep down into the rabbit hole on the Sartre blog. And there are two main sticking points of why he doubts that Craig Wright is Satoshi. One is the absence of signing. The second is the personality break in the writing style and behavior of Craig Wright and Satoshi. Unis is an educator who teaches university-level classes about Bitcoin, and the judge was very keen on getting the distinction between BTC versus BSV. After the first three witnesses for Hodlonaut's team, we switched to Craig Wright's team. The first witness for Craig Wright's team was Stephen Matthews. Hodlonaut's lawyer asked about various early drafts of the white paper, putting them up on the screen and asking if Matthews recognized them.
I had it on my laptop in electronic form. I also had a printed version that was on my desk. That was in 2008. I have no idea where the paper version went. I left that company. I moved internationally. My laptop was replaced.
He also asked a lot of very detailed questions about the Andreessen signing session. And the judge had a couple very interesting questions at the end.
Is it of any importance to the company that you're chairing whether it is Satoshi Nakamoto or not?
The last witness of the day was Robert Jenkins, also called by Craig Wright's team. He was giving a lot of detail on the Vodafone firewall, and to be honest, it was a pretty short examination on both parties. So that was today. We will have another round of witnesses tomorrow, and we will also be doing witnesses into next week. Thanks for tuning in. This marks the fifth day of the 7-day Hodlonaut versus Craig Wright trial here in Oslo, Norway. This was our second day of witnesses. We had a total of 8 witnesses take the stand. The first half of the day were character witnesses called by Craig Wright's team. The first witness was Yusuf. He was a classmate with Craig Wright. He talked about different things that they studied together. They eventually also went into business together and started a corporation. The second witness was Neville Sinclair. He's an accountant from BDO. Craig Wright's lawyer was asking a similar line of questions as yesterday, both what is your technical impression of Craig Wright and what is your personal impression of Craig Wright. The third witness for Craig Wright was David Bridges. He has a bank called Kudos. Bridges is not a Bitcoiner, and he didn't talk much about the details of the technology, but he did say Craig Wright is very educated in security law and financial services. And when asked if he thought he is Satoshi Nakamoto, he said, if there is one person that could pull this together, it's Craig Wright. The fourth witness was Lynham. He's the cousin of Craig. He gave an extensive childhood backstory in the witness. He talked about their upbringing. When asked if he thought Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto, he said,
we knew for years that Craig was the creator of blockchain and Bitcoin.
The last half of the day was the KPMG expert witness called by Hodlonaut's team. The first part of it was 2 witnesses, actually, and they both kind of shared the stand. and went through a very extensive metadata report. They were talking about the inconsistencies between the paper size, between the date that they had been edited, written, whether a font existed at that point in time. They also went through various drafts of the white paper, and they were pointing out any inconsistency that they could find. The last part of the KPMG expert witness was about source code, but it was very technical. I know the judge even at a certain point assigned a longer break during the KPMG witness, as she said this is a lot to digest. Thanks for tuning in. That wraps up this week. We'll be back on Monday to resume and finish the witness testimonies. Today was the 6th day of the Hodlonaut versus Craig Wright trial here in Oslo. The first part of the day were the remaining 3 witnesses called by Craig Wright's team. The first 2 were from BDO. They pointed out a few technical discrepancies, but the judge asked a clarifying question at the end, taking all of this into account. Would this have actually affected any of the content? To which they said no. The last witness was a cyber and corporate investigator at Sci4. She clarified that her analysis is a high-level review due to time constraints rather than a merely critical report. After completing all of the witness testimonies and expert witnesses, Hawkus began his closing statement. He reviewed points Craig Wright made during his witness testimony, points made in the KPMG report, reviewed the signing session with Andresen. He basically did a high-level review of all the points previously made and drew a connection between all of the arguments. Hawkus's last remarks were very powerful. He was summarizing the legal system in Norway, citing the freedom of speech outlined by the Norwegian Constitution and the European Convention of Human Rights. You need to have the possibility to criticize people in power. It protects the individual's right to search for the truth. This case is about 9 separate tweets over 4 days in March of 2019. What is the defamatory element in the tweets? Which statements damage the reputation of Craig Wright? A defamatory statement that is true is lawful. A true statement is always protected. That's it for today. We will be back on Wednesday for the last day of this 7-day trial here in Oslo. Today is the final day of the 7-day Hodlonaut versus Craig Wright trial here in Oslo, Norway. Myklebust and Hawkus concluded the closing statements before the first break. The remainder of the day was Manhouse and Helly delivering the closing statements for Craig Wright. During the closing statements, Manhouse cited all of the major arguments that had been highlighted throughout the case, and Helly went through all of the witnesses that had come to testify for Craig Wright. After Manhouse concluded, the judge permitted Hawkus time for a rebuttal. Hawkus did an additional 40 minutes of rebuttal, and then Myklebust had a few clarifying points as well. During the 40-minute rebuttal, Craig was scribbling furiously and ripping pages very loudly, passing them to Helly. Then the judge went back to Manhouse and said that he could have an additional 40 minutes, which he did not take. The last part of the day, the judge went over the court costs and the timeline for the ruling. In the discussion of the court costs, Hawkus objected because Craig Wright's fees are almost double what Hodlonaut's legal fees are. After the discussion about the court costs, the judge permitted 2.5 weeks for Manhouse to settle all of their court expenses, but with the agreement that the BDO and Cypher expenses would be sent in the following days to Hawkus. As to the ruling, the judge said the 8th of November. It might be ready before then, but she will give a 1-day notice to both parties before the ruling is announced. We will keep you up to date as we get more information about the ruling. That's it for this 7-day court case. Thanks for tuning in.